While we're getting the slides pulled up, let's go ahead and, if you don't mind, taking your seat. It's the last session of day one, and we are really excited about discussing it depends, or the word of the day, tomatoes. So as we think about this, we heard a lot of it depends. We heard a lot about, we really need to worry about what happens if we have the null hypothesis. Is it because of the way the study was done, or just the drug didn't work? So how tightly controlled do we need to think about the treatment settings? And on the converse, how do we need to think about patient size? And safety, autonomy, evaluate all of those elements that participants really care about. So as we think back about the last session and about blinding, we really want to focus on pragmatic or real-world trials. And so if you believe that you should trust something that is very carefully managed, things might happen in a way that you are not expecting. And so to just illustrate this point, I went to the sage words of Dilbert. Don't start, I'm late for a mandatory safety training. I better run. We carefully manage all the elements about how the patient handles it, and guess what? Things are a mess. So what we need to think about is what happens if we try to prevent a bad outcome and it happens in reality. The other thing that we need to think about is what happens if we say, well, just do all of the unusual things that you wouldn't normally do. Don't run, don't walk with coffee. In fact, give up coffee. And I can tell from this room, that would be a very, very unusual requirement. So you might say, well, we'll just let things happen as they do in real life. Well, tomato. What you see is I found this place that really encourages handoff approach to management. And as you notice, the poor lab assistant on the right-hand side his hands are completely bandaged. So what we want to hear from Ben and from others is, what do we do? What's our obligation to deliver safe care if we're watching what happens in real world? What do we do, and what are our obligations to deliver state-of-the-art care to patients that are enrolled in pragmatic trials? And so, using a decision aid, we have a few things where it depends. So, similar to the other decision aids, we have some standards. The study question is already defined. We already know what protein we're going to add to our gumbo. We know that the roux is good quality. And we have somebody that's randomly assigning things to support valid inferences. So for today's discussion, what I want you to really focus on in this last panel is what's in scope. How much variation do we want, or are we willing to accept to say that the results are valid in terms of treatment, in terms of setting, and in terms of provider? And what element of patient safety do we need to consider as we're thinking through these studies? So for the decision aid for this, as we'll be walking through it, looks like this, and there's 6 questions. So how much would the effectiveness or safety of the study treatment vary among providers or care? How is the variability related to different levels of resources, experience, or expertise? What level of resources, experience, expertise are now present in the care settings which these results would be applied? And as we heard from John earlier, what level of resources or experiences are now present in care settings for which this trial would be conducted? We heard that it took a long time to get those study sites up and going for the Salford lung study. What might we expect in other studies? And how much does it depend? What special vulnerabilities or risks are anticipated in the different populations? We're going to hear some really great examples showing why it depends from Larry Alf shortly. And then is there some minimum level floor of treatment quality necessary for valid inference regarding the study question? And what's the minimal or floor level of treatment quality necessary to assure participant safety? And I'm thrilled to say that on this panel, we have someone representing the patient view. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists and welcome our panelists. First, we have Larry Alfs, who's Chief Medical Director at Neuron Pharmaceuticals. Ben Noel, Director of Patient-Centered Research from Global Health Living Foundation, is going to be talking about what the patients might think about these types of studies and how much control is needed. And then Peter Stein, Deputy Director, Office of New Drugs, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the FDA.